Why are shared universes interesting? On the face of it, it's just cool having different characters live in the same universe. The immediate assumption might be that it's just cool because crossovers are easy. Big events like the Avengers are exciting, and it's cool seeing big stories branch together. But for me, what makes shared universes so valuable is that they make the world feel real. Yeah, the crossovers are neat, but just the knowledge of watching something and understanding that all I'm getting is a small slice of a much bigger world is something I love. Peacemaker just ended its second season to a response that's mixed as of me writing this. Following up the true beginning of the DCU and being written by the co-CEO of DC Studios, it has a lot of eyes on it. If you care about spoilers, all I will be talking about is what the final episode teased for the wider DCU storyline and some very old MCU stuff, with a little bit of Thunderbolts. But not a lot. This, of course, brought up similar discourse about having to watch a ton of garbage people don't care about in order to understand the story. This is an understandable concern. When you have these movies sold with the idea of a shared universe, with event movies where characters meet each other and conflicts grow bigger than the individuals of these stories, it makes sense audiences are gonna want to see that full picture. So when these stories grow and get bigger and bigger, it makes sense there'd be concern over whether or not it's easy to follow, especially when you're mixing PG-13 and R-rated material, which literally is not meant to be watched by everyone. These stories are so insanely different that it'd be insane to expect most audiences to be able to keep up, which is why they're not. Peacemaker Season 2 was the first DCU release after Superman. It picked up plot points from Superman, and Superman was even released on digital just over a month after its theatrical release to ensure people could watch it before Peacemaker Season 2 started. Despite this, when asked if you can watch it without watching Superman, James Gunn said, "Yes, for sure. We explain everything. Just more fun to also watch Superman." The new DC universe is lived in. Superheroes have existed for most of its history, and Superman is just one of many. On top of this, it's not even the first thing in the DC universe. You got edge cases like Blue Beetle and the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker Season 1 that were retroactively put into the universe in a soft canon kind of way. The Suicide Squad, for example, has aspects of it that are canon, like Rick Flag Jr., but if a later DC project contradicts it, like Harley Quinn getting recast, for example, it's free to do that. And then you have Creature Commandos, which objectively is the first thing in this new DC universe, but it wasn't supposed to be.
Can you talk a little bit about why start with Creature Commandos?
Well, the reason is, very technical. It's because it was written when I started as the CEO of DC Studios. I wrote the scripts without even having a deal, and then I happened to get hired as the head of DC Studios, and I very graciously, thank you, greenlit the show, and we made it.
So literally speaking, Creature Commandos is the first story in the new DC universe. So why does James Gunn call Superman the true beginning of the DCU? Well, it's because not nearly as many people watch Creature Commandos. That's not to say it's a failure or that it contributed nothing. It's just to say that when it comes to the big project that most people are going to see as their first DC universe story, it's going to be Superman, not the R-rated animated series with a robot who kills Nazis. And what's cool about Creature Commandos is the subtle ways in which it's not referenced directly, but still adds to Superman. There's this moment at the end of Superman I really love. Rick Flag Sr. is in a room watching the news about Superman, and the guy in the room with him says,
"Glad you're not concerned about the metahumans, Rick, because now they're the ones making the rules."
And then we have this slow pan towards Rick Flag's face as he gives a very conflicted expression while the music swells. In a vacuum, this merely shows that he isn't super happy about metahumans being accepted to such a degree. But if you've seen Creature Commandos, which Rick plays a much larger role in, his reaction holds so much more significance. The reason why he's not happy about metahumans being accepted so much is because he's seen what they're capable of to an extent barely anyone else has. He led a team comprised of a glowing skeleton with acid powers, the Bride of Frankenstein, a fish girl, a robot from World War II built to fight Nazis, and whatever the hell Weasel is. If you watch Superman as its own thing, he's just uncomfortable with what's happened. If you watch Creature Commandos, you get to see his personal experience that shows why he's uncomfortable. And of course, this leads into Peacemaker, with him making a metahuman prison. This is the value of a shared universe. Being able to give depth to a character by showing how much bigger the world is than themselves. And the best part, you don't need to know any of this in order to understand or enjoy Superman, because Creature Commandos isn't a hyper-important thing. It's just another event that happened in this world. Which is why I love what the universe is building up to. At the end of Peacemaker Season 2, Peacemaker's pocket dimension thingamajig is stolen by Argus, and he's put into an alternate universe with no escape. James Gunn has explicitly stated that this is going to lead into an adaptation of the story Salvation Run, a story in which the DC Universe villains are sent to a distant planet so they don't keep breaking out of prisons over and over again. Before Peacemaker Season 2 ended, everyone was guessing that the universe would build to an Avengers-level threat. You know, Thanos, Darkseid, something like that. But James Gunn isn't doing that here. He's adapting Salvation Run. Not a story about some big bad guy trying to destroy the universe, but instead a story about all of the supervillains being sent to a distant planet just to get rid of them. And in order to do a story like that, you need the supervillains. It's a great thing to build up to, because just by introducing villains, you add to what the story could be. Clayface? Lobo? Who knows? Clayface in particular is a great example of how much the individual story matters to James Gunn. Clayface appeared in Creature Commandos as a loudmouth annoyance that played Mortal Kombat in his free time. I would be shocked if the Clayface in the upcoming movie was to be like this at all, especially given the history of the character. The reason for this movie is because it was kind of dropped on Gunn's lap.
We didn't come into this job like with Woman of Tomorrow or Lanterns. Woman of Tomorrow, Lanterns are both things we talked about when we had our initial writers room. We knew those things were coming. Clayface was not on our on our checklist, but Mike came in with a pitch for Clayface that was like, whoa, that is so cool. And then he wrote the screenplay and fulfilled doubly on that
Right.
promise.
Clayface was not made with the DCU in mind, but here we are. Clayface is looking to be the 6th major project in the new DCU, despite the fact that it was never in the original DCU slate. The only things that are releasing from that slate this year are Lanterns and Supergirl. Clayface is coming before the Batman of this universe. Some poor guy is hunched over a desk writing Batman as we speak. James Gunn wants to build a universe where great stories are the #1 thing. It's why Clayface has come first. It's why nothing is getting greenlit until a script is finished. On the subject of Clayface being announced so recently,
This is a story of a couple of Green Lanterns, John Stewart and Hal Jordan. In it, they discover a terrifying mystery that ties into our larger story of the DCU.
and fast forward to today,
I had another thing I wrote that I put on the ending, and he's like, what? And we knew salvation was a part of our future. I didn't know I was going to put it here. We knew it was a part of the DCU plan. And I told him what it was, and he goes, oh, you got to put that in there. Yeah.
plans change. There's a good chance many of the projects in that DC slate aren't going to happen. Things aren't looking bright for the Authority. Swamp Thing's in a weird state with James Gunn avoiding specifics and James Mangold being swamped in other projects. We've heard nothing about Waller. Apparently Booster Gold is still happening, but I haven't heard zilch. And even outside of the DCU slate, Sergeant Rot got canceled. The uncertainty for these projects does not mean the DCU is doomed. And even if the universe as a whole goes wrong, that doesn't mean pieces of it are unsalvageable. Superman's a great movie. I loved Creature Commandos. Comics fans have been through this before. Most people hated the New 52, but we got Court of Owls out of it. When the individual story is what matters the most, nothing will be unsalvageable. Taking their time with these individual stories is more important than building up to Dank Dukas or whoever the hell. There will be setups and payoffs like Salvation and even Jarhanpur.
Rick Flag, General, Boy Scout. He and I fought together in Jahanpur some months ago.
But those are secondary to just having the individual stories be good. Which is where Marvel has faltered. There's a lot that can be said about the MCU's rise and fall, but I want to start off by talking about what they did right. Films in the MCU definitely connected together, and damn well. The way these films branch together from Iron Man to Endgame is a magnificent achievement that has not been topped before or since. Despite how much of an achievement it was, I think what made it work was using the shared universe as an underlying side plot rather than the main focus. Iron Man's post-credits, we have Nick Fury saying he wants to build a team, and then Iron Man 2, we get more info on that, but it's not the point of the story. The plot is not obsessed with building up to the Avengers. It's cool seeing Black Widow's introduction. It's fun seeing how ambivalent Tony is to the idea of building a team. And these are all great things for building up to the Avengers without hampering the primary story of the movie. It's cool building up to these big events among multiple films, but when what I really like comes when the universe is more established. Captain America Civil War is an Avengers movie in a trench coat. If you exclusively watch Captain America films before this, it's not as good. You won't have as strong an understanding of most characters' perspectives like you do Captain America, Falcon, or Bucky. Does this make it bad? No, but it is a good example of the common critique of these films, that is, you need to watch all of this before you watch this. Civil War is an example of what most people think the value of a shared universe is, but the best example of what I think the value of a shared universe is would be Spider-Man Homecoming. The opening shows the aftermath of an alien invasion. Lots of tech, lots of destruction in a city, and some people talking about it. Is this a bunch of weird stuff that makes no sense unless you've seen the Avengers? Or is it world building? Imagine you just watched this movie off the previous Spider-Man films and nothing else. Don't care about any of the other Marvel characters, you're just watching the new Spider-Man because it's the new Spider-Man. This opening scene teaches you that Spider-Man is just one of many, that the things he and his ilk get up to are common occurrences, and since you didn't see his first appearance in Civil War, we get a small recap of that here. The recap of Civil War in particular is very well done, since if you haven't seen Civil War, this catches you up, but if you have seen Civil War, you're not bored since it's a new perspective with a radically different presentation from the original movie. This is different from Civil War because none of the significant references to the shared universe require character attachment, not even Iron Man. All you need to know to understand him is he's rich, he's the one who gave Spidey his new suit, and he's a mentor figure. And all of that is explained in Homecoming. Civil War, on the other hand, is about a schism within the Avengers, so that movie is made better if you've seen these characters in their respective movies due to every character's personal philosophies and morals having been built up throughout multiple movies. When I see people talk about the MCU, I see a lot of people treat it as one big series, which is fair. These stories build into and out of each other a lot, and once again, this is nothing to scoff at. But if you're not a huge fan, and you're from the outside looking in, it creates the impression that you need to watch all of these movies. You don't need to watch all of these movies, but sometimes you should. Is that a problem? I think so, but I also don't think anyone would be wrong for disagreeing. Especially when there's movies like Infinity War that are sold as huge crossover events, and the original comics where a character dying is about as eventful as someone sneezing. I'd say you could watch Avengers and Age of Ultron in a vacuum, and understand what's going on. Infinity War starts pushing it a little bit, with Captain America being a vigilante, but once again I view Civil War as an Avengers movie in a trench coat. After that we got the Guardians of the Galaxy, but none of the Avengers know who they are at this point, so if you've only watched the Avengers movie up to this point, you'll be as familiar with the Guardians as the Avengers are. And then you have Endgame, literally being a time travel story where they go back in time to previous movies. Endgame is definitely the worst if experienced exclusively watching the Avengers. It's still understandable, but when the story is so centered around referencing previous Marvel movies, you're going to miss out on a lot if you haven't seen said Marvel movies. This isn't a bad story because of the shared universe, but I think the focus on having everything fit together like this hurts a lot of these stories as standalone pieces. Watching a trilogy and then being told, oh yeah, a main character in the last movie died in another series, hampers the quality of that series as its own thing. Before researching, I thought Gamora's death was something the Russo brothers did regardless of James Gunn. But in researching it, I found this comic book article from 2023 where James Gunn said that the Russos told him the plan and Gunn gave his blessing. The Guardians movies were always planned to be a trilogy, and going off this article, it was a trilogy that he was fine modifying. It's cool to see how these movies branch together and how major events from one movie contribute to another, but when you have characters die outside of their series, I feel like that's way too big a thing to just recap people on, like Spider-Man in Civil War or Ant-Man being on house arrest. Spider-Man Far From Home is perfectly understandable if you've only watched Homecoming. They spend the first 20 minutes explaining the aftermath of Endgame and the snap, but just going, oh yeah, Tony's dead now, hurts these movies working as one series, especially when the movies start to decline. Making this video, I realized that the best movies from the MCU were the ones that took advantage of it for the sake of storytelling instead of using it as a crutch. Deadpool and Wolverine was funny, but its use of shared universes was very much so a crutch. It was a source for gags, with the story itself being very heavy on references to previous films, and is somewhat salvaged by starring a character that nearly from point of inception is known for pop culture references. Also helped by the movie's plot feeling less like a story about people saving something and more like a meta-commentary on cinematic universes and corporate mergers. I remember when the DCU got restarted, people were talking about having Peacemaker physically go into the new universe via the teleport closet mabob, instead of just retconning the important stuff. I'm personally very happy they did the latter, since I vastly prefer them just retconning stuff instead of contriving a reason for Peacemaker to want to leave his home universe. Deadpool doesn't feel contrived here, since by virtue of being a comedy-focused character that breaks the fourth wall, he could just wink at the camera and have that be an acceptable explanation.
Suck it, Fox. I'm going to Disneyland.
Peacemaker Season 2 is kind of an interesting test for what you value in a shared universe. A lot of people were disappointed, and I'll admit, I did like Season 1 better. I think a big reason people were disappointed was because it was a lot more character-focused than people expected. It introduces the multiverse, not for references, but instead to explore Peacemaker's worldview. He wants to live in a world where he's loved, where his family is still alive and still cares for him. And due to his upbringing and joy at this alternate universe, he doesn't notice the red flags around him. It's a bold choice for the first installment after a big budget blockbuster like Superman to be a more character-driven story, where the major conflict isn't a villain that needs to be stopped, but just a man realizing the people around him care for him, and that he's fine where he is. Yeah, there are more major conflicts that objectively affect the world in a major way, but the anchor of the series is Peacemaker's dissatisfaction with the world around him. It's a very different story, which I like because I don't think a whole cinematic universe should feel homogenous, and I think James Gunn agrees, but he can also give off mixed signals to people who don't listen to every single interview he does and stalks his thread replies like I do. For Peacemaker Season 2, James Gunn talked endlessly about how Superman leads into it. It takes place after Superman. The first episode has tryouts for the Justice Gang, you know, stuff like that. But once again, you don't need to watch Superman to understand it. It's just more fun to do so because of how they mesh together. It's really cool. It can add a lot of depth, but more cynically, it's advertising. If you can convince people they need to watch everything in a shared universe, I don't think I need to explain how that leads to more butts in seats. I'm trying to convince you that you shouldn't need to watch everything in a shared universe, so I want to make it clear that the people making these universes might, intentionally or otherwise, make you think that you do because it's just good marketing. My advice is to watch what you like. Most post-Endgame MCU movies didn't land for a lot of people, but oh, there's No Way Home, and oh, there's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I think Thunderbolts was also an example of shared universes done right. They have a story with a point and a through line, and then it feels like they thought to themselves what characters would lend themselves well to this, instead of the other way around. Thunderbolts is about someone trying to cover up government corruption. So who would be involved in that story? Ghost was in Ant-Man and the Wasp, Taskmaster was in Black Widow, who then makes a triumphant return here. And they apparently established that Bucky was a senator in Captain America Brave New World, but I didn't watch that one because I heard it sucked. But they explain everything perfectly fine here, so I didn't need to. I still enjoyed Thunderbolt. My favorite uses of shared universes with this much connection isn't when a bunch of heroes cross over to have a huge fight, it's when creatives pick and choose from the toy box to see who would fit. Wonder Man isn't out as of me writing this, but seeing someone like the Mandarin actually do proper acting work is going to be super interesting. Those who've watched Iron Man 3 will get a kick out of seeing him again, and going off the trailer, they make it clear what his history is in the show itself.
Pretty sure he used to be a terrorist.
That right there is how most shared universes operate in my experience. At the beginning of the video, I used this clip from No More Heroes because these masks you collect throughout the game come with a note signed with the initials MS. The game the developer did before this, Killer 7, has a pro wrestler character named Mask Smith. Is it him? Definitely could be. The timeline for Grasshopper's games is a bit of a mess that the writer made up as he went along, which actually isn't super different from the MCU.
I never understood what any of the phases were in Marvel. I don't know what any of it means. Like, I knew there were Infinity Stones when they said, you know, we've been thinking, and we think that maybe some of these things have been Infinity Stones in different ways. And when I wrote the scene with the Collector, explaining what they mean and where they came from, that was literally me just sitting down for 3 minutes and writing that, and that's then what became the rest of the Infinity Stones.
Obviously, it's different since Suda51 just likes referencing previous material of his and reusing old characters versus the MCU, which was always planned to be a massive universe with the Nick Fury post-credit scene in the first Iron Man. But I think there's a comparison to be drawn in what should be prioritized. That, of course, being the individual story. I love shared universes, but what should always be the priority is the individual works. So, what's the pinnacle? What is the pinnacle of shared universe fiction? Well, there's a series. Multiple series, in fact, that together lasted over a decade, that to this day has individual installments that are considered some of the greatest works of art ever, where each installment stands on its own wonderfully, a work of art where the connectedness of each series doesn't come from a cynical desire to keep people watching more and more, but from a place of genuine passion and love for the craft. I'm speaking, of course, of the Sonyverse, baby! Wow! Venom is the best trilogy ever made!